Welcome to Berkshire and to an area that's shrouded in history. There's gibbets to artefacts, long barrows to hill forts, plenty to marvel at in this stunning setting. And almost 300 metres above sea level, in a county that's relatively flat, the views are pretty spectacular too. And today we start our walk here, at the highest natural point in the southeast of England, and on the once Iron Age hill fort of Walbury Hill.
Walbury Hill is located in the southwest of the county of Berkshire and is situated close to the borders of Hampshire and Wiltshire. At 297 metres or 974 feet above sea level, it's the highest natural point in the southeast of England. From Walbury Hill we follow the clearly marked trail of the Wayfarer's Walk and the Testway, which mark the parish's divide, a short distance to the Combe Gibbet and the long barrow on which it stands. The wide path boasts beautiful open vistas on either side, leading us into the county of Wiltshire and through the sleepy village of Buttermere and onto the tiny 13th century church of St James. As we leave Buttermere, we enter open stretches of fields and woodland before reaching our second church, the 12th century church of St Swithin, which sits in the tiny hamlet of Combe. From here, it's a short stroll uphill before returning to Walbury Hill.
Now, hill forts in this part of the country are certainly not uncommon. And here, on the summit of Walbury Hill, and on what used to be the county border between Berkshire to the east and Wiltshire to the west, is a once Iron Age hill fort of Walbury Camp. It would have been in use some 2,500 years ago, from 600 BC to around 50 AD, and it covers an area of some 82 acres, making it the largest hill fort in Berkshire.
Walbury Camp would have been seen as a considerable feat of construction in its day, having massive encircling banks, and when in use would have been defended by a timber palisade, of which sadly nothing remains today. Of a more modern history and located on the northwest side of the hill is the Merville Battery Memorial. In the fields and woods below this hill in May 1944, the 9th Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant T.B.H. Otway, DSO, rehearsed plans for their successful assault on the German coastal artillery battery at Merville, France, before the seaborne troops landed in the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944. Legend has it that the Combe Gibbet, which was erected on top of a Neolithic long barrow, was put up to hang the bodies of George Bromham, a married farm labourer from Combe, and Dorothy Newman, a widow from the nearby hamlet of Inkpen, who together were found guilty of the murder of George Bromham's wife Martha and Dorothy Newman's children.
It was erected in 1676, if the stories that we know about are true, and it was erected on the barrow because in those days people used to quite often be executed on barrows and buried on barrows because they were regarded as non-sacred ground.
What stands here today is not the original gibbet. Acts of vandalism and Mother Nature have all played their role in seeing several replacements over the years. But tradition upholds that the gibbet must stay as it's become part of the landscape here, and with it, the stories surrounding it.
There are 3 separate stories. They all involve the murder of a spouse. One reported by the local vicar who came to the parish in about 1850, and that involved a farmer and a woman over the hill who were having an affair, and the farmer wanted to get rid of his wife and pushed her into a hornet's nest, stung her to death. But then when he was telling his lover about this, her children overheard it. He then killed the children, I think that's right.
There's been several variations on the story over the years, but records show that they were executed only for the murder of Dorothy's children, whose bodies were reportedly dumped a few hundred metres west of here in Wigmorish Pond. Records make no mention of George Bromham's wife, Martha.
Maybe tradition will preserve a garbled version of events, and maybe George Bromham did murder his wife by thrusting her head into a hornet's nest. Either way, they both paid the ultimate price for their relationship and putting this area firmly on the map.
So the long barrow would have been dug as a grave for a Bronze Age person, probably around 1000 BC, that means. But we have no idea of anything exact about it because it has never been scientifically or seriously excavated or looked into. It's there because it's in that position, partly because it's prominence, but also because it's on the boundary between 2 parishes, Inkpen and Combe. And it would have been a place where people came from the 2 parishes came to have meetings, to have assemblies, and to discuss sometimes conflicts between the villages, and sometimes and maybe to have other kinds of celebrations. We don't know. But in later years, not long after the person was originally buried there, it would have also become sacred in a way, been kept shining white, so that would have meant something to people, but eventually it also became a place where executions should take place.
And if any of that chokes you up, well, there's always the views.
For the more adventurous, this trail forms part of 2 long-distance walks starting in the area. The Testway, a 44-mile or 70-kilometre long walk finishing in Southampton, and the Wayfarers Walk, which is a 70-mile or 112-kilometre walk finishing in Portsmouth. With a couple of kilometres ahead of me before reaching my next destination, Buttermere, there is ample time to take in and enjoy the scenery. As we continue down the path, we descend into the tucked-away hamlet of Buttermere. Buttermere has traditionally been a farming community, but in the late 19th century the amount of arable land declined, and by the early 20th century there was more grassland than arable, which in turn saw sheep farming decline and dairy farming increase. The Grade II listed Church of St James, so called in 1763, was wholly rebuilt in around 1855 and rebuilt on the same footprint using salvaged materials.
We've now crossed the border from Berkshire into Wiltshire and arrived at the first of two churches we'll be visiting on this walk, the parish church of St James's. It's one of the smallest churches in the county and where there's been a church in various forms for over 700 years.
The old church, standing in the 13th century, was built of flint and had an undivided chancel and nave, a north porch and western bell turret constructed of timber, of which doesn't remain today. The windows in the north wall were replaced in the 14th century and the porch built in the 18th. The new church has the same plan as the old, except it was given a small central timber spiralet instead of a western turret. The spiralet was removed in 1946 when the bell was hung on the outside of the west wall. The spiralet that you see today was built in 1991 when it was decided to leave the bell in its current position.
me and a path, me and a view, me and a tree, me and a tree and a path, me and another view, me and lots of trees, me and a cow.
There's been a church on this site since the Saxon times, and this one dedicated to the scarcely documented St Swithin, who became the Bishop of Winchester from his consecration in October 853 AD.
The church would have been originally set up in either the 10th or the 11th century. The church is known as St Swithin, is therefore closely associated with St Swithin, who was a 9th century Bishop of Winchester. And the church, as in its early years, was associated with Winchester. The tower, we think, is 17th or 18th century. It's a wooden tower, a very interesting wooden tower. There are quite a few others in this part of the country, but they're not very common. The nave, the main bit of the church, is obviously later Middle Ages, as the windows and the general aspect of the church show. The building, however, we have today, the oldest bit is the chancel, as in many parish churches, the east end of the church, which must date from the 12th century approximately. We don't know, we don't have any evidence of any church earlier than that, and in fact the church is not mentioned in Domesday Book, but that does not prove that it didn't exist at that time.
We've read that it's either a Saxon bowl with a later base, or it's a 14th century font. I'm not quite sure how that opinion has come about, but it clearly is not a Saxon bowl on a later base, because it doesn't look as though the bowl and the base are two separate objects. They seem to be either one piece, so I think that can be discounted. But it could equally be that it was a font that was made by some Victorian or Georgian stonemason based on a Saxon bowl. So we really don't know.
Which is sad, because it would have been nice to have had more chapter and verse of the background to this very simple but lovely atmospheric church. And it has got a lovely atmosphere, and when people who don't know it come here for the first time, they invariably write in the visitors book of this, feeling that they have about the peace and charm of this very simple but lovely little church. We are all devoted to it, and we hope that it goes on being what it has been over the hundreds of years, a place for people to come and worship and rest and think and pray.
With the end of the walk just over a kilometre away, the gentle flat walk through the lovely hamlet of Combe will enable one to savour some energy before climbing the final leg of the trail, Walbury Hill itself. Having lived in the countryside, I can put one more in tune with it and its history. The tiny hamlets of this place in all their glory is just a sample of the many quintessential English hamlets that beckon the visitor to discover them, their secrets and their past. But for me, secrets or no secrets, history or no history, the sheer serenity of the English countryside is just unique. That alone would be all the reason I would need to stay in it.